in there. My name is Alan Esco. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing for BKT Canada. We're glad to have you join us today. I guess this is a bit different way of doing a farm show, but it is going to be exciting and interesting, and hopefully we can get ourselves through this. I would ask that if at all possible, you can save your questions till the end. That way then Dave Polk, our presenter, can go through his full presentation, and we'll have more time at the end to entertain questions. I've been told that we actually can go a little bit longer than normal because we are the last presentation for today. So if there is lots of questions at the end, Dave will definitely try to address them as quickly as we can. And I guess without further ado, Dave Polk, our technical manager for North America, it's all yours.
No, thanks, Alan. Welcome everyone. We are going to talk about tires versus tracks this afternoon. Hopefully, for those that are running both or either or, it'll give you a little bit of insight into it. There's actually advantages to both. So with that, I'll get started. The debate between tires and tracks is ongoing. You hear a lot of while we're out and about. You hear a lot of conversation, which is the best. It actually depends on where you're using the equipment. It also depends on gaining flotation and traction in wet dirt, or reduce ground disturbance and traction in dry dirt. As we go through this, tracks are used a lot in wet dirt because of the flotation. The main difference between tracks and tires is how they distribute the weight and how this benefits you. When comparing tires to tracks for traction, there are pros and cons with both. So both of them have a different, the tracks are longer, wider, so they distribute weight a little bit differently than tires do. But according to the type of dirt that you're in, it can either be a good thing or a bad thing. Tires have the footprints that contact the ground during the revolution of the tire. So the bottom of the tire is in contact with the ground, whereas on the track, it has a longer footprint. The machine's weight must be transferred evenly to the ground during these revolutions. So as the tire's turning, the bottom of the tire is in contact with the ground. The larger the footprint of the tire, the more evenly the weight is distributed and the less ground bearing pressure it delivers. Tracks have a greater ground contact area that reduce the tractor weight and the transfer to the ground. So I've got some slides in here. We're going to talk about air pressures and things like that a little bit, because the air pressures make a lot of difference on tires compared to tracks. With the introduction of IF and VF tires, you can run lower air pressures to give more footprint, traction, and flotation. In the past, we had standard tires around forever. The mid-90s, IF and VF tires came out, and I'm going to talk about IF and VF tires so that you kind of understand what they are. But IF tires, if you'll see like an IF 710-70-38 or VF 710-70-38, the IF tires are rated to carry 20% more weight at the same air pressures as a standard tire. And the VF tires are rated to carry 40% more weight at the same air pressures as standard tires. So if you take a standard like a 380-90-46, a VF, it'll carry 40% more weight at the same air pressure, or it'll carry 40% more load at higher air pressures. So if a tire can carry the same weight at 20 to 40% less air pressure, this allows for a larger, wider tire footprint and a longer footprint, with more of the tires and the tire and the lugs on the ground for traction and flotation. It allows for less slippage, fuel savings, and a wider footprint. This is kind of weird. So on average, tracks deliver about 4 to 8 psi of ground bearing pressure, or pounds per square inch of ground bearing pressure, to the soil when they're parked, depending on the tractor weight and the track width. This changes once they start moving. It changes when the tractor is under a drawbar load and because of track stiffness. There's a couple other things that contribute to it, but it does gain a little bit more. And the contact points with the drive wheels and the bogey wheels increases this some. If you see the picture, it's got the 1, 2, 3 on it. You can see how the bogey wheels are pressing the track down, and the drive wheels, you get some ground bearing pressure under those as it's moving. Radial tractor tires generally have about 1 to 2 psi higher ground bearing pressure than their inflation pressure. So if you're running 10 psi in a tire, it's basically got about 12 psi ground bearing pressure. 14 would be 16. The increased flexion, the IF and the VF tires, very increased flexion, were developed to carry the same weight as standard tires with lower air pressures. So if you take those tires, if you have the standard tires, you replace them with VF, then you can run lower air pressures to give you less ground bearing pressure. And that's the whole thing with soil compaction, is you want to run as least air pressure and tires as you can in the field, because it gives you less ground bearing pressure. This is, I just threw these in here, but this is kind of the effects of soil compaction. If you'll see the stalk of corn that I've got circled in red, and soil compaction is a whole other training thing, but what happens is the soil doesn't let the root grow. It goes out sideways instead of going down when soil's compacted. And you notice on the one that I have circled there again is after it's done and produced an ear. So what that does is, though, is it cuts production, not near as big ears of corn and things like that. So tires provide better traction as their inflation pressures are decreased. IF and VF tires, and as we said again, they're able to carry more weight on the road without having to widen the tractor with triples. If you're running double on a tire on standard tires, and most of the time that's plenty, but according to the weight of the tractor, sometimes some of these tractors are heavy, and especially with the saddle tanks and things like that on them. So sometimes you need the weight carrying capacity of the IF and VF tires. Where VF tires come in where you see a lot of VF tires being used on those is on sprayers, on the big sprayers, because they run 40 miles an hour, they carry a lot of weight, and they load them a lot of times and then drive them down the road to the field. So there's a lot of weight on them, and sometimes it's sloshing back and forth. So you need the weight carrying capacity along with the higher air pressures. But on the IF tires, I'm gonna back up just a sec. On the IF tires, you see there's a lot of implement tires now being made in IF, like the 95L15s that we used to use a lot of. The loads got heavier, so people started using the farm highway service tires, and now there's radial tires made in an IF that carries the weight, but they run less air pressure in the field than a farm highway service does. Like a 11L15 farm highway service, I think it runs about 90 psi. The IF radial runs around 64 psi, and it carries the same weight. So you can see in radials you can reduce air pressures, whereas bias you really can't. So in terms of traction, tracks work better in wet soil. Tires do as well or better sometimes in dry soil. Tracks tend to float across the ground in wet dirt, and so thus they don't create ruts. What happens with a tire in wet dirt is it creates a rut, and so it's always trying to dig out of that rut. And so you spend a lot of power with your tractor trying to dig out of the rut instead of going straight down the field. Whereas tracks tend to float more, they have better flotation, they tend to float more across wet dirt. Tracks have a longer footprint, and they can have a wider footprint depending on what width of the track that you're running. Tracks generally work with less slippage, about 5% slippage compared to 8 to 15% for tractors. And I'm going to talk about slippage for just a sec too. This is really not tires versus tracks, but it's important. So basically, with the track using only about 5% slippage and a tractor anywhere from 5 to 15, you would think that it would give the tracks the advantage of pulling heavy equipment where triples can't be used. And sometimes it does. If you're pulling real heavy equipment, like, you know, a lot of times you see 450, 500 horsepower tractors pulling rippers and stuff like that. Tracks do work well for that. Field speeds with tracks are equal to field speeds with tires when the tractor's set up correctly. So in the field, you can run both of them run about the same speed. In terms of fuel economy, tracks are designed to work with about 5% slippage, like we said. Tires are designed to work with between 8 and 15, with 8 to 10% being optimum. So you've got to have some slippage with tractor tires, but you don't want to have over 15%. Tracks are possibly a little more fuel efficient with less slippage factored in, but there's other factors to consider when you're talking about cost, such as the cost of operating and maintaining tracks. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit more. But soil compaction has to be considered when using either one. You can get both of them pretty close to minimize soil compaction. Tires should be, as we said, tires should be maintained 5 to 15% with 8 to 10% optimum. Slippage occurs when the tires are turning faster than the tractor ground speed. If you have too much slippage, you lose less than 60 to 70% of the power produced is used to pull an implement, and it drops to 50% on soft or sandy soils. So you need some slippage, but you don't want to have a lot. You don't want to have too much. To talk about slippage just a minute, some power is lost in hydraulic systems such as cab air conditioners, transmissions, and other systems. Most of the power is lost in transmitting power from the tires to the soil. It may seem as if efficiency would increase without any slip, but that's not always the case, because even a track has some slippage. They slip about 5%. But the suspensions on tracks are set up a little bit different than tractors, so they can kind of handle that. The power is limited by the rolling resistance and the wheel slip. Too much or too little ballast. If you don't have enough ballast on the tractor, you'll get too much wheel slip. If you have too much, you get too little. You need some. You want to have some wheel slip on there. Limited slip, it improves tractive efficiency, which tractive efficiency is what measures how well a tractor uses the power available to pull an implement. The slip provides a safety valve, and this is where slip's important. It provides a safety valve against shock overloads that can damage the drivetrain. So some wheel slippage is needed to reduce the wear on the drivetrain. That's why slippage is important. And it's just the way tractors are set up. So tractor suspensions, they've gotten much better from the early days of tracks. Whenever they first came out back in the 80s and stuff, the suspensions were pretty bad. They rode rough. The tracks didn't hold up very well. They didn't get very many hours. So there's a lot of improvements that have been made on these machines since then. So now they're more comfortable to ride on the road. However, pneumatic tires are still better for the highway. Pneumatic tires don't wear out as quick on the highway as tracks do, especially in hot climates. In hot climates, tracks get eaten up whenever you're running up and down the highway with them. So while track manufacturers have much better compounds, there is a lot of setup with the undercarriages for a track installation, including alignment and lubrication. You have to, and I'll talk about this in just a sec, but you have to make sure it's aligned, make sure there's no rocks, sticks, dirt, and all that stuff in there, or it'll mess up your drive wheels and your bogey wheels. So there's actually two different kinds of tracks. There's one that's called a direct drive, and there's a friction drive. like on the Versatile, the direct drive, it has a wheel up at the top, and those guide lugs actually fit in that wheel, and as that wheel turns, they pull the tracks. Whereas like on the John Deere on the right with the friction drive, you have two drive wheels, and the track's put on, it's spread out, and it's tight. So as those wheels turn, they turn the tracks. Those tracks still have the lugs in the middle, but they're used for guide lugs. They're used to keep the track in between the wheels. So, and John Deere's come out with quad tracks. Case has got quad tracks. Case has had quad tracks forever. So there is a little bit of difference in the tracks. The track components, a component of like a quad track or a short track, if you'll notice, the wheel up top is where the guide lugs fit in. You've got the two buggy wheels on the bottom and the two guide wheels on the front and back. And so what happens with these though is if you get in the mud and things like that, they get rocks and sticks. Those are coated with rubber, so it'll start chewing up the rubber. So you have to replace those sometimes. The bearings in them go bad. Sometimes you have to replace. So there's a lot of expense. Sometimes on track machines. On the friction drive, you can see the friction drive is pretty similar, except it has one track instead of four. There's 4 bogey wheels on the bottom, and you have the drive wheels. You have the drive wheel on the big drive wheel on the back and the steering wheel on the front. Again, all those are coated with rubber. So if you get debris in there, rocks, sticks, dirt clods, stuff like that, chunks of dirt, they can start chipping and chunking out the rubber, and you have to replace them. Tires still seem to work better when a farmer must move equipment around from farm to farm. With the size of farms and not one farm being in the same place, tractors are roaded a whole lot more now. And I see a lot of tracks and stuff on the highway also, but tires generally last. They generally last because they're pneumatic. They got air in them. They ride a little bit more comfortably. But although ag tires are not made specifically to run on the highway, they pretty much still deliver more hours than tracks do, if you have to road them a lot. If you have a track and it stays in the field or on a farm all the time, they almost dry rot before you wear them out. But when roading them wears them out pretty quick, especially in hot climates. As I said, farms are scattered, and often tractors must be transported on the highway. The highway speed for tractors is 25 to 45 miles an hour, with some of the high-speed tractors like JCB and Fenton those now. Tracks are 25 miles an hour. So some tractors, according to what you get, they will run faster. When roading is one of the most extreme uses for an ag tire. It's a tire's worst enemy besides the hard pavement is heat. Heat buildup is terrible for a tire. That's why they need to be run with the right air pressures and stuff, and the correct air pressures. The amount of air needed is dependent on the load and the speed. And BKT and pretty much every other manufacturer has a data book. And we use the data book a lot. That's basically a tire man's Bible. And so when you're roading, though, one of the things to keep in mind with tires is the pressure that you use in the field is not always the pressure you need on the highway. In the field, you can run, I don't know, according to how much weight you've got and this and that, you can run 10 or 12 PSI, 14 PSI. But on the highway, the air pressures need to come back up because you're running at a faster speed. You're not running near as slow as you are in the field. So the faster the speed, the less load carrying capability the tire has. So it needs more air pressure in it. And I don't have that in here, but that's the reason that I know some of the manufacturers, Fendt, and I know Klaus has come out with one, but they're putting the air inflation systems on tractors now, or they've been testing them for a while. They are starting to put air inflation systems on where you can drop the air down when you're in the field and kick it back up when you get on the highway. because I know that it's aggravating to have to keep changing air pressures all the time. With tracks, you don't really have to worry about that because they're not pneumatic, and so you don't have to deal with the air pressure deals. So which is better? Tracks have an advantage in wet soil. You've heard the adage, if it's too wet in the field, stay out. However, that's not always reality because crops have to be taken out of the field in the fall, and sometimes you have to plant when it's wet. So no matter the weather, the conditions, that's not always reality. This is the purpose of tracks on combines and grain carts. We see a lot of grain carts that there's Camso, I think, and a couple other companies probably make aftermarket track kits that you can put on grain carts and things like that while you're in the field, because it does compact a lot less in wet dirt. In dry dirt, tires and tracks are close as far as traction and soil compaction are concerned. With today's tires, you can drop the air pressures. You can get the air pressures pretty close to what tracks are. The more serious question is the cost of operating tracks or tires. Although the price of tracks have come down some, they're still very expensive. I'm not sure how much they cost in Canada, but like the long track for John Deere, I priced some of those earlier this year, and they were about $15,000 a belt. So you're talking about $30,000, and then if you have to replace bogey wheels or drive wheels and bearings and stuff like that, they can get pretty expensive to do. Whereas on a tractor, you basically only have to worry about tires, wheels, and hubs, and mainly tires and wheels. And as long as calcium chloride and stuff like that you don't use in wheels, they pretty much last forever too. But there's many moving parts on a tractor on track tractors. While there's advantages and disadvantages to both, you must decide what's best for your farm and what costs you can live with. So with that being said, there's some advantages that tracks have over tires, or advantages tires have over tracks. Tires generally last longer. They ride better on the highway. With the IF and VF technology that's come along, you can drop air pressures in there. You can get them close down to what a track runs at with ground bearing pressure. Tracks are much better in wet dirt. They have a longer footprint, and they can have a wider footprint according to the size of the tracks that you go with. So that's basically the difference in that's the layman basic terms in the tires versus tracks. And just a parting shot. Some people feel the rain, others just get wet. Alan, that's it for me. Alan. Hello.
Are you there?
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I had to unmute myself.
Okay.
So
that's the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dave. There is a couple questions that came in on the Q&A part.
Okay.
Matt has asked, is there a maximum weight on the VF tires?
Well, there is can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Hi, sorry, Dave, 1 second. Can you just stop sharing your screen there for a second?
Yeah, let me get out of here. Stop share. Okay. All right.
There we go.
Go ahead.
Okay, say that question again, Alan.
Is there a max weight on the VF tires?
Well, it's according to the size of the tire. There is, according to the size, there is max load carrying capacities on them, and there's air pressure, different air pressures, according to what air pressures you run them at. So, I mean, yeah, there is weight carrying limitations with them. Was that kind of the answer?
I'm guessing that's what it was that he wants to know if there's a max weight. Matt, if you're still with us, raise your hand, and Brittany can unmute you so you can, if there's more questions or if Dave didn't answer that, to the way you want, you can ask further details.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, hello, how are you?
Good.
I am very pleased to be here today. Thank you for answering question.
You're welcome. Did I answer to did I answer the question?
I think he's going.
Yeah. Okay, so
Okay.
then there was another question, Dave. It looks like it's Cole has said he really enjoyed your info, enjoyed your talk, but he asked if you have any comment on the LSW tires. So if you want to take a shot at that carefully.
Yeah, well, I mean, the LSWs, of course, is made by Goodyear Titan. It's a tire that they came out with it on a few years back, and they've really been pushing it. One of the things about tires is they're driven by the OE, by original equipment. They're driven by that industry. John Deere didn't jump all over it for some reason, right? I know the people that I have talked to about the LSWs, that it's a wide tire, so you get good flotation with it. But when up in Minnesota, some of those guys up there said they took them off because they don't clean out very well in mud. Now that's a farmer telling me that, so I haven't actually seen that problem with them. But that's what I was told. They said one of the problems is they just don't clean out very well because of the long tracks and stuff on them. The concept, it's a good concept. Instead of running duals, to be able to run singles, one of the other problems is though is once you go to LSWs, you're tied into Goodyear Titan because nobody else makes them. Nobody else has seen the need to make the LSWs.
Is it not also, just correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but they also have to go to a specific wheel with
Yes.
that tire. So if they ever
Yeah.
go away from the LSW, they actually have to change
Wheels.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the problems with LSW is only one manufacturer makes it. And so if you get the tire, you have problems with them, don't like them or whatever, you got to buy new wheels and tires to get away from them. Whereas everybody makes standard wheels and tires.
Got it. Okay, that's all that was actually on the Q&A that I can see from here. Nope, hang on.
I saw one more.
So Cole said, thank you very much for the answer. Very good points. So I think you answered it very well then.
Okay.
Alan,
we've got a question in the chat.
Chat from Russell. You say tracks are better in the wet than the dirt, or sorry, my screen just jumped. You say the tracks are better in the wet than in the dry, but in my experience, tracks packed with mud don't clear, whereas my tires do. Is it just my soil, or is this a common thing?
Sorry, say that one more time, Frank. I missed it there.
Yeah, you say tracks are better in the wet than in the
Yeah.
dry, but in my experience, tracks packed with mud and don't clear, whereas my tires do. Is this just my soil, or is this a common thing?
Yeah, all dirts are, the different kind of soils you get into are different. I mean, there may be an instance where tires do work better. The problem is a lot of times, as you see, is people get into the fall, they get ready to harvest and it starts raining, and it rains about 5 or 6 inches or whatever it does, and you have to get your crops out of the field. Well, so tracks, just the nature of tracks, you've got a longer footprint and a wider footprint. So instead of compacting dirt and creating ruts, they generally roll across it. They generally do better about rolling across dirt than they do packing it down. Whereas with tires and real wet dirt, they'll rut, and so you're always trying to roll out of that rut. Your tires they've rutted and they're always trying to dig out. So that's kind of the basis behind that they work better in wet soil. and you'll see a lot of people, they'll put tracks on grain carts, combines and things like that when it's real wet outside, when it's real wet whenever harvest. Not so much in planting, because unless you're sowing wheat or something, unless you're sowing something like wheat or things like that, people use tracks for that. But in row crops like corn, soybeans, things like that, tires are still predominantly used. But did that answer the question? Yeah.
That was in the chat, so hopefully, Russell, that answered your question there.
Is there any others in there, Frank?
No, just that one there.
Yeah. And if everybody's still on, different soil types or different things. In the United States, you see all kinds of stuff. There's dry dirt, there's wet dirt, there's loamy dirt. If you get up north in Minnesota and Wisconsin and places like that, up near the Canadian border, the dirt's a little bit wetter. They get more snow up there. They get more moisture. You come into the south and it's a lot drier. And there's some areas, and even dry areas, where you see tracks at, but they use the tracks for tillage and stuff mainly. You see a lot of that, where they're pulling the heavy equipment, like some of the big harrows and some of the big rippers and things like that. So, yeah, it all depends on where you're at and where your farm's at, as whether tracks is a good fit for you or not.
Alan, you might want to mention about Thursday coming up.
Yeah, I will. Let's just make sure there's no other questions first. Brittany, are you seeing any hands raised at all?
Nope, I don't see any there.
Is there anybody else out there that has some more questions? We are seeing some comments here. Thanks, guys. Dave, they're all saying great session, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I don't see anything else, so I guess, Brittany, if there's no other ones. Yeah, it seems like there's no other questions. Everybody's thanking you, and so I guess if there's nothing else, we're done. Dave will be back on Thursday afternoon to do one on soil compaction. So if there's more interest in hearing him talk about soil compaction, please feel free to join us on Thursday afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Great. Thank you.